easy 4K as well. Surefour absolutely just saved this game for the Gladiators.
One of my favorite things about the Overwatch League right now is the fact that it always seems to be in flux. A team may look amazing in one stage, only to falter or completely flop in the next stage. Examples of this include the Outlaws Stage 1 versus Stage 2, the Spitfires Stages 1 and 2 versus Stages 3 and 4, or the Uprising Stage 3 versus Stage 4. Even if a team is at the top currently, there's no guarantee that they'll be there for long. Teams will move up and down the standings almost at random due to the meta, roster changes, or if just a certain player goes on a hot streak. When you look at the Gladiators, however, you notice something that isn't true for any other team. Steady, consistent improvement. From near the bottom at the start of the league, all the way to the top. In this episode of Season in Review, we're going to take a look at the LA Gladiators' highs, lows, and everything in between to figure out how the Gladiators maintain such a steady rise. But first, let's figure out where the Gladiators came from. The LA Gladiators are owned by KSE Esports, who are led by Stan and Josh Kroenke, and I'm sorry if I pronounced that name wrong. If that name sounds familiar to you though, it's because these guys have owned sports teams in almost any league that you could think of. Football, basketball, hockey, soccer, they got it. So the fact that they were willing to invest in the Overwatch League isn't much of a surprise. Now, unlike Robert Kraft, who is running the team with his own company, the Kroenkes brought in Sentinel as a smaller esports company who were known mostly for their League of Legends team prior to the Overwatch League to run the Gladiators. So the Sentinels had an interesting strategy for choosing players. Instead of taking a whole team all at once or just choosing individual players, they ended up taking duos that had played together before, like the tank line of iRemix and Bishu, both from Kongarna, while the support duo of Big Goose and Chaz were both from Giganti. The DPS were a bit of a mixed box though. They took Surefour from Cloud9, Asher from Conbox, and Hydration from Counter Logic Gaming. With just 7 players, the Gladiators were the second smallest team in the league besides Florida at the beginning of the season. Let's hope the lack of flexibility wouldn't come back to haunt them. The Gladiators in Stage 1 were just like their 4 and 6 record suggested. Not terrible, but still below average. Let's go through the positives first. Hydration established himself as a star early on with his ability on every projectile DPS hero in the game. Asher was, and still is in my opinion, the most underrated tracer specialist in the league. Big Goose and Shaz were also a very underrated support duo, the former of which being one of the few examples of a Lucio specialist that successfully made the swap on the Mercy, which I respect a ton considering so many people have had trouble with that. There were some issues with the tank line though. iRemix and Bishu had some trouble underperforming at the season's beginning, and the rest of the team struggled as a result of that. Also, Surefour's hit scan play at this point was pretty mediocre. I couldn't really tell you anything special that he did in Stage 1, but maybe that's because he wasn't in as much. The Gladiators couldn't seem to decide on a starting DPS duo. Surefour, Hydration, and Asher were swapped around constantly, and I think it prevented this team from being able to synergize as quickly. Because of all that, the Gladiators finished Stage 1 in 8th place, and everyone seemed to be accepting that they would be a low to mid tier moving forward. That is, until Fissure stepped in. Fissure, if you didn't know, was an incredibly talented main tank on the London Spitfire. Most people would call him one of the best main tanks in the league. The problem was he was on a roster with Gesture, who people would also call one of the best main tanks in the league. Unfortunately, Fissure lost the main tank battle on the Spitfire, and Gesture started like 95% of the time, but most agreed that he had way too much talent to be sitting on the bench. That's why when it was announced that he would be transferring to the Gladiators, the excitement was massive. Welcome, Los Angeles, to the Fissure show. The one roadblock was the fact that Fissure was Korean, entering a team with English comms, and he didn't speak very much English. The team got around this by having Bishu, who is a bilingual, translate Fissure's calls as he gave them. Let me repeat that, because people have praised him for this, but this is just really impressive to me. Bishu was playing an Overwatch League level diva while also translating Fissure's calls from Korean to English. And the guy did it all with the biggest smile. He never complained once, and that's why I have so much respect for Bishu, and he's honestly one of my favorite players in the league, but that's enough gushing about that. Fissure's skill was well worth it. His Winston opened up so much more space for the rest of the team with his playmaking, and allowed them to make more plays as well. With him on the team, just his presence raised the level of play for everybody else. With a 6-4 record in Stage 2, the Gladiators didn't make the stage playoffs, but the team was one of the most hyped up and talked about teams in the league, and it's all due to the Fissure show. To go along with Fissure, the Gladiators announced 2 more acquisitions in between stages 2 and 3. The first was Void, the off-tank specialist from Kongdu Panthera. Now, I already gushed about Bishu, but he has one glaring weakness as a player. He has a terribly shallow hero pool. He has a hero pool of 1. D.Va is the only hero that he can consistently play at an Overwatch League level, which is obviously not ideal for an off-tank player who is expected to be able to swap from off-tank to off-tank in the mid-game. Void was mostly known for his Zarya, and hopefully would give that team some flexibility on off-tank. The second acquisition was Silkthread, who transferred over from the Valiant. Silkthread is a player with competency on many heroes, and would give the team many more options on DPS. Stage 3 was significant for another reason too, the rise of SiR. As Widowmaker began to become more and more important in team comms, SiR suddenly exploded onto the scene in Stage 3, quickly solidifying himself among the best in the league. Because of this, and the team becoming more synergized with Fissure, the Gladiators were able to make the stage playoffs, where they got blown out by the undefeated Uprising. But still, progress is progress, and the Gladiators were making plenty of it. Stage 4 was the absolute peak of the Gladiators season. After an entire season of grinding and committing to get better as a team, Stage 4 was the culmination of all of it. Everyone on this team was solid, even if they would switch Bishu for Void or Hydration for Silkthread. By the way, at this point the Gladiators had settled on their starting 2 DPS. SiR for his Widowmaker specialist, and Hydration for his Genji, Junkrat, Hanzo, and Doomfist?
So, but with Valky's recharging fast, and while the window has closed, doesn't really matter though. Hydration, no hesitation from him. Manages to pick up the big kill there on Zappis. Nearly finds Swoosh as well. And guess what happens next? You're gonna go for the res? I don't think so.
Alright, Doomfist. The Gladiators went 9-1 in Stage 4, with their only loss being to the LA Valiant. But with first place in the stage, they could pick their opponent. They picked the LA Valiant, and lost. Great confidence booster, guys. Now, of course, I get that the Gladiators knew that a battle of LA v5 would be great banter, and ultimately had the season playoffs in mind, and just wanted to give a good show, but let's just hope the team didn't lose all their momentum. I mean, they haven't won a playoff game yet. Things were looking pretty good for the LA Gladiators in the quarterfinals. They were set up to go up against the London Spitfire, who had yet to beat the Gladiators with Fissure in their lineup. But just hours before the Gladiators were set to face off, they dropped an absolute bombshell. For the first time since the end of Stage 1, iRemix would be starting over Fissure. Well, except for that one time that Fissure got sick, but still. Understandably, this was met with ire by the fanbase. Fissure was their star, their MVP candidate. The guy who saved the team from mediocrity or even low level. Why would you bench him just before the most important series of the season? The reasoning that the Gladiators gave for this was that the meta in Stage 4 and the playoffs preferred a main tank that stayed back with their teammate and protected them, which for iRemix fit him better than Fissure, who was more of an aggressive playmaker. And for the first match, it seemed to work. The Spitfires seemed to be surprised by the sudden introduction of iRemix, and the Gladiators just ran in circles around the Spitfire with a 3-0 sweep, and their King's Row fake out has turned into the stuff of legend.
Oh, the high ground. Yeah. Oh, this is so nasty. SiR's chilling in spawn. So he's waiting here. He can sort of walk out. What does he try to do?
I think he's going to either switch to Widowmaker I'm gonna call this the merry-go-round because it makes me laugh, makes me happy, and Shawfall switches to the Widowmaker at just the right time. Closer drops down, and it's a day at the shooting range for Lane Roberts. The Canadian superstar unloads on the Spitfire, and they get completely smashed.
After that, though, let's just say the Spitfire suddenly remembered they were playing Overwatch. Maybe they've readjusted to the iRemix thing and completely destroyed them, but they just smashed the Gladiators in Day 2, taking 6 straight games to knock them out. My personal opinion, iRemix was not the only problem here. The Gladiators were simply outplayed at every turn on those 2 sets on every single position. But with Fissure on the bench, the Gladiator season ended with the entire fan base, nah, the entire league, wondering, what if? So now there are rumors swirling that Fissure wants out of the team, and the expansion teams are gonna have first crack at all the tier 2 talent. Gosh, whatever will the Gladiators do? I mean, iRemix is okay. I still think he isn't terrible, but he's not the playmaker on main tank that this team needs. Oh, who can they get? Oh, wait, right, Panker, of course. The main tank for the Gladiators Legion is considered to be one of, if not the best main tank in all of Tier 2. Can play all 3 main tanks at an Overwatch League level, and while he is Korean, has played in an English-speaking team for the past year plus. If this guy is not the Gladiators' main tank of the future, it's honestly a shame and a missed opportunity because someone will pick him up for Season 2. I will bet on that. Despite a disappointing end of the season, you can't deny that the Gladiators' rise from mediocrity to low tier in Stage 1 to the best record in Stage 4 is something to marvel at. They have a great group of players here and should be able to stay in the mix for a long while. They are 0-3 in elimination situations, though. That's all I'm saying. That's why my final grade for the LA Gladiators in the first season of the Overwatch League is a B. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't get tilted. Peace nut.